Okay, good morning. My name is Ntechinedum Victor, and this will be my week 3 recording for the Flexi Saf internship weekly task. And let's head straight to the curriculum so we can see our activities for the week. So, and this is the third week, and our activity for the week is framework architecture. So, we're actually discussing the RESTful architecture here. The RESTful architecture, how it occurs in layers from the persistence layer, service layer, down to the endpoints where our endpoints are exposed, where our requests to the service method are being routed to. And in this, we are given a task. The task says create a Spring Boot application with at least 4 endpoints. So, and with this being said, I'll have to head straight to the IntelliJ IDEA where the task is actually done. So, and this is the IntelliJ IDEA. So, sorry about this. I have to, okay. So this is IntelliJ IDEA. I will close this and open it again so we can see the arrangement, how it goes. So now this is these are our packages and the layers as well. So we have the the repository layer here, which serves as our persistent layer because it's actually the interface that helps us persist data into the database. So all the manipulation, all the CRUD function that create, read, and update, and as well delete data from in the database is actually done in this within this interface, the repository. And this is the service layer, and this is the controller layer. But before we go into explaining them into detail, so I'll talk about the entity layer first. In Java, we use the ORM, the Object Relational Mapping framework to actually map our entities to a task, to a table in the database. But that will be our next week. Task. I won't have to go into details now. But like we know that each entity here represents a table, and each instance of the entity represents a row in the table, and each attribute of the entity of an entity represents a column in the database. So, and with that being said, I'll just go straight to explaining the persistent layer. And before explaining the persistent layer, still in connection with it, I have to establish a connection or explain the connection between the database and the application, and that is done here in the application in the resource application of properties in the resource package. And this file here, this file can actually come in .properties or .yml. So, and with this being said, I'll just open it up and we'll see how the connection is done. So this database actually been the database I've been using for the task, for all the previous tasks I've done, and this is the URL connecting the database. This is the URL connecting the database, as you can see, and these are the details. So this connects us to the server, to the Postgres server running on this port, and this particular crate here means that each time we run our database, we destroy whatever data we already have there persisted there, so we create a new one. But I think I'm just gonna make it update because I wouldn't like to create a new one each time I restart the application. So, and with that being said, I will go straight over to the persistent layer. Now, in the persistent layer, we already have in our pom.xml some dependencies. This is a Spring Boot application. Like we know that the Spring Boot actually abstracts some configuration that could be done manually. So, and in our with the help of dependencies, and in our pom.xml, we have a couple of dependencies here that help us run that, and doing that here is the Spring JPA dependency. This particular dependency here, the data JPA dependency, and the Postgres driver. The particular database we're using here is relational database Postgres, and that is that for the dependencies that have been that that is helping us in persisting our data in the persistent layer. So and in that, I will open one of the repositories here. First off, repository is an interface, and it extends the JPA repository. So the JPA here, because we are using a technical JPA. If it was MongoDB, no SQL, would have been Mongo repository or whatever repository that we want to. So and doing that, so it will always extend the repository, taking two data type here, the user and the ID of the ID of that entity. So the user here is the entity that we are persisting, which represents a table database, and the ID of the entity we are using, which is a long here, as we can see. So and that. So now let me explain some things here. Major, because it's an interface, it has a abstract method. Though Java has actually brought some another way of having abstract method with both the default method. But in this case, we're using an abstract method, and by default, the JPA repository already has some default methods like save entity, delete, and whatever, like the find all for reading data from the database. So, but in this case, we actually need a custom method that will help us throw an exception. Why it's optional here is we would want to throw an exception if the user we're looking for is not found. So, and with that being said, we also check the task repository where we have some other queries that are actually not default queries. As you can see, this kind of queries are actually a kind of custom queries that try to fetch data or manipulate data the way we want it. And look at what's going on here. Is we have in our entity we have a status which is an enum, and enum can either be persisted as numbers or digits or a string in the database. And in this case, it's persisted as digit, and we want to be moving the status from the enum from enum to enum, which include pending task, in progress task, and completed task. So that was why we had to write this query to be able to move them from the status value to another status value. So and that is that for the persistence layer. So we just know that this persistence layer acts as an interface between our database server and the application. And that is that for us. So we hope we move straight to the service layer. So the service layer is actually where the business logic is actually written, and the business logics are our controller or our endpoint layer is actually where we map where we tie our as in a service to an endpoint, so exposing the service through those endpoints. And in the service layer here, two things are actually done. Number one is that we have to use an interface to abstract all the methods that we implement in the service layer. So and the methods here, let me just open the user interface here. The user service interface here has all the abstract methods that are going to be implementing in the service layer, in the user service implementation. So all these methods here are actually implemented there, and they include the create user, the get user, update user account, and the delete user account. So and with this being said, we just move straight to the service implementation where they are implemented and see how it's done. So I'll be creating few methods here just for demonstration, but I've actually done this during while I was doing the task. So and you can see this here, we created a user. So let's just see. In this case, actually, I had to create a DTO so that I will not be accessing the user entity or be fetching objects from the user, data from the user's entity at the same time. So I created this user request and use it as a DTO for collecting data from the user. And looking at this now, there's actually something done here. So this done here was in the constructor of the user. I had to create this object. I had to pass in this object such that I wouldn't have to make my logic my logic way long here. So it was actually done in the user entity, as you can see. So I had to create the object, the constructor of the user, and pass in the registration request, that is the DTO, so that when creating the logic for creating a user, I wouldn't have to go over again repeating these things. So that is actually the clean code principle. So now, with this being said, we can actually create our user in many other ways. Let me say public user. Should the top type should be user. Create new user. Create new user, and we pass in the user object here. Let's pass in the user object. We say user. So we can simply say return user repository. So repository dot save. This is a default method in the user JPA repository. So we say save the user entity or the user object here. So, and that is that. So with this, we've created a user. So this will persist the user in our database. So, and that is that. That can as well do that method. And here we find the user by ID. So we pass the user ID here. So why we are able to throw exception here is, should the user not be available in database, we should be able to tell the person that yeah, the user you're looking for is not available, and and this is possible because of the optional data type we made the user in the repository. So, and that is that for user service implementation. So all these services here, all these methods here, actually fetch, read, or delete data from the user base. This in particular deletes a particular user. Like I already said earlier, that every instance of an entity represents a row. So this deletes a user occupying a row in the database. So that is that. Okay, we check the user the task implementation service also. So we created a task here, and we have a task response. A task response here. The task response here just brings up the whatever response we want to see after creating the particular task. And these are the response we want to see: the task title, the task status, created on, updated on, if it's still active, if the deadline has passed, and the particular user that that created the task. And that will be that for task service. So we see we created task here. We fetched task by ID, and we fetched task by user ID, a task by user. And the essence of this interface pageable is to enable us paginate every the list of data, tasks we're fetching from a particular user, and look at how it's done. So, and it was actually sorted or ordered using the particular date those tasks are created on. So the task recently created will be on the top list, or recently updated, and that is that for task. So this particular logic updates the task, and this particular logic deletes task. This logic change task status. So we don't have the luxury of time to go through all these methods one by one. So, but this is what happens in the service layer. The business logics that actually manipulate those data, persist those data, manipulate, read them, are actually written in the service layer. And this is the major thing our data, our backend data, like backend does, interacting with data. So now we head straight to the controller where the endpoints are written. So we go to the user controller first. The user controller, first off, our controller here is just going to be, is just going to have this annotation REST controller, meaning that it's a combination of request body and the controller service. We already know what controller does. Controller, as for MVC, is actually an intermediary between our service, that is the service, and the model and the view. So the model being being the business logic and the view being the user interface. So in this case, this is actually the intermediary. It's an as in it's intermediary between users. Users request and the business logic or the data we have in the database. So, and with that being said, so this request mapping here is used to tie the request coming from the user to services in different services in the service layers. And as you can see here, we use post mapping. These are HTTP methods: post mapping, get mapping, put mapping, delete mapping, patch mapping. So post mapping for creating data into the database, and when we use response ATT here, we would also want to return why we return the response of the object or the request body. We also need to return the status of the same particular request. So here we use the response entity.ok. So meaning that it will be returning the 200 response status code. So the same thing happened here. So and post mapping creates data, like I said. Get mapping fetches data from the database. Put mapping updates into the database. Delete mapping delete data from the database. It deletes resource. Then the patch mapping actually does a partial update of the resources. So and that is that will be that for the entities. So let me see how much time I've consumed. Sorry. Okay, this is 16 minutes. I'll just round it off by testing any of the methods. So we go. So the same thing happened here. So that's a 4 endpoints. So let me just let's just use this for today. The 4 endpoints here, and we still have more endpoints than this this controller. So we just go straight to our postman and test those methods. So and in our test postman we have this. We have okay, where is it? Papers. No, this is not my workspace. This is not my workspace. My workspace is this. Okay, papers API. Okay, so we have a Flexi Saf. So let's open this, and we call on this method create user. Now, if you look at this method takes JSON body. It takes the JSON body, and so we create this first user, the user first name, the user last name, and the user email, and we try to persist it. Let's see what we get. Okay, FlexiSaf registered successfully. So when we want to fetch this user, this should be the first user there. We want to fetch this user, then we can let's fetch the user here, the get method. Yeah. So we want to fetch the user, we can here we don't need to pass anybody, so we just pass the ID of the particular user, which is 1. When we make this call, when we make the call, we will get the user, and this is the user we just persisted. The user has not created any task. If not, the task would have appeared here. Then now let's update anything from the user. We can update the first name, or let's update the last name. Let's update the last name of the user. Let's say last name. We say let's give it Nte Chinedum. Okay. So when we make this call, you see that the user this actually failed, so we'll debug that later. So and to delete a user, we have to let's check our database to see why it failed. And user not found. So let's check the database to see the name of the user. The user was not found. So let's check our database here to see the user ID that we have and why that particular one failed. So this is our database, the database we are processing our data into, and our schema here. We come to the tables here, and here in the table we check the user data. Okay, let's see what we have here. View data and all rows. So what do we have here? Okay, the user ID is 1. The user ID is 1. Okay, let's go back to our postman. So get user user ID one. Okay, we did that. Update user. Oh, sorry. Update user. Oh, what happened was the user ID was wrong. So let's update the user here. One. Yeah. So when we update it, we'll get its account updated successfully. So that was because we passed in the wrong user in the path variable. So that is that, and we can also delete the user doing the same thing. So delete the user. We already have the user ID here as one. So let's make the call, and oh, the account was deleted successfully. And if we go back to our database, we don't have any user. So that these are the four endpoints that we created and we tested them. So and that will be all for the weeks. So I can't go back again. Control going over the whole thing again. I believe that that was clear enough. And thank you so much for your time.